I find perspective drawing absolutely fascinating. You connect few dots and lines and ta-da! You have an object in 3D space. When I first started studying perspective, I wondered, how did we come up with this method? And I found out it all started with this guy, Filippo Brunelleschi, who actually lived just a few miles from here in Florence. Brunelleschi lived in Florence in the 15th century, so the Renaissance period. And like many before him, he wanted to find an accurate way to give the illusion of depth in his drawings. Considering that he was an architect, you could imagine that was fairly important to him. Brunelleschi observed that with a fixed point of view, parallel lines such as these ones tend to converge at a single point at a distance, which is called the vanishing point. And that's how he invented perspective. But did he really? No, it's not entirely accurate that Brunelleschi invented perspective. Perspective was actually known and used all over the world before Brunelleschi. For instance, there are examples in Greece of statues looking right only from a certain point of view because they use perspective. And there are examples also in India of paintings using perspective. Even in Florence, where Brunelleschi lived, there is a famous example of perspective being used in architecture, which is the Giotto Tower. The Giotto Tower is not actually completely straight. It grows a little bit larger the taller it gets. And this is because they wanted people looking at it from the ground up to see it perfectly straight, so it uses the perspective correction. So why do we remember Brunelleschi and not everyone who came before him? And why do we say that Brunelleschi invented perspective? Well, it's actually because before Brunelleschi, perspective was mainly an art technique. And with Brunelleschi, it became a scientific method which is still taught in schools nowadays. So let's see how it works. So here's the plan. Step 1, I'm going to do a quick overview of how 1 point, 2 points, and 3 points perspective work. And step 2, I'm going to put it all into practice and do not 1, not 2, but 3 different paintings, each using a different perspective. Let's get started.
So, I drew here 3 boxes for 1 point, 2 points, and 3 points perspective. Just know that you can have as many vanishing points as you want, but traditional linear drawing uses 1 to 3 vanishing points. Linear perspective requires a fixed point of observation, which is represented here by these horizon lines. The horizon lines represent the actual height of the viewer's eyes when looking at the scene. So first things first, let's draw our vanishing points. For 1 vanishing point, you want to draw 1 single point on the horizon line. For 2 vanishing points, you draw 2 points on the horizon line. And for 3, you draw 2 vanishing points on the horizon line and 1 either above or below. In this case, I'm drawing it above. So let's start with 1 point perspective. When do you use it? You use 1 point perspective when you're looking straight on at an object, so perpendicularly to one face of the object that you're drawing. And you start by drawing this face of the object, the one that you're looking straight on. In this case, I'm just gonna draw boxes, so I drew a rectangle. Then you connect the corners of the rectangle to the vanishing point. Notice how I didn't connect the 4th corner, just because that line sits behind the object, so you actually don't see it. Then you draw the back face of the object by moving towards the vanishing point and connecting the convergence lines you just drew. The more you move towards the vanishing point, the longer the object you're drawing is. With the same technique, let's try to draw a box on the horizon line and one above it. And there you go. This is how you draw in 1 point perspective. Let's now move on to 2 points perspective. You use 2 points perspective when you're not actually looking straight onto an object, but you're looking at it from a side. In this case, to draw our boxes, you start by building the convergence lines that meet at the vanishing points. You draw 2 lines from each vanishing point that meet somewhere in between the vanishing points. The polygon that you form is actually the bottom face of the object you're drawing. Then you draw the angle of the object you're looking at. The longer you draw this line, the taller the object is. Then you draw 2 convergence lines from the top corners of the line you just drew, and you connect them to the bottom face corners, like so. Now you can draw the 2 upper sides of the faces you're looking at, draw another 2 convergence lines to connect the corners to the vanishing points, and you have your box. Now let's repeat the process like we did before and draw 1 box on the horizon line and 1 box above it. And that's how you draw in 2 points perspective. Let's now move on to 3 points perspective. 3 points perspective is actually very similar to 2 points perspective, but you also get a vertical perspective, which happens when you're looking at a tall building from the bottom or from above. You start by drawing the convergence lines like we did before. And this is your box sitting on the horizon line. There is actually no space to draw one below the horizon line, so I'm just gonna draw one above the horizon line, but the principle is always the same. In this case, since the box is above the horizon line, you can actually see the bottom face as well. And there you go. That's how you draw in 1 point, 2 points, and 3 points perspective.
And this is very quickly how linear perspective works. If you want to learn how to draw entire scenes with it or draw organic shapes in perspective, then I recommend to watch these tutorials I found. They're amazing, and I leave the links in the description below. So now it's the time to put all this knowledge into practice. What you can do with perspective is mainly two things. So you can try to depict reality with perspective, and this means reverse engineering the perspective grid starting from a photo or reality.
So here's an example of a house in a 2-point perspective. The first thing you need to do is follow the horizontal lines until they converge, like so. The 2 points where the lines meet are the vanishing points, and then you find the horizon line by connecting the 2 vanishing points.
Or, more exciting, you can try to construct a scene entirely from imagination. And today I'm going to do a little bit of both. First, I'm going to try to replicate the best that I can these 2 pictures that I found on Pinterest with 1 point and 2 points perspective. And then I'm going to move on to 3 points perspective, and I'm just going to use a reference photo as a starting point, and then I'm going to add elements just from my imagination. Let's see how it goes.
So I start by building a grid to make my life easier later on, and then I start sketching the building on a new layer. If you never tried, let me tell you, this is a long and tedious work. No wonder why many artists try to find faster way to do this. Leonardo da Vinci, for instance, built something that he called a perspectograph, which basically allowed him to trace the scene that he wanted to paint on a piece of glass. The perspectograph, to put it simply, was basically a piece of glass fit into a frame, and you could look with one eye through a viewing slot and basically trace whatever you saw on the other side. Okay, a few final touches and I'm almost done with this one. For this one, I decided not to build an entire grid, it's just too time consuming. The reference photo that I'm using is a picture of Venice taken from a canal. Interesting fact about Venice and perspective. Those of you who have been to Venice probably know Piazza San Marco or St. Mark's Square. Well, Piazza San Marco was built in the 9th century, so well before Brunelleschi and his invention of perspective. But interestingly enough, who designed Piazza San Marco also used the perspective correction. If you enter Piazza San Marco from the side opposite to St. Mark's Basilica, you notice that the square seems perfectly straight. But it's not. It grows larger the more you go forward. And it's just to give the illusion that it's perfectly straight. For this painting, I decided to use some custom-made watercolor brushes that a friend of mine kindly shared with me recently. And here are the final results.
And now it's time for the fun part, the 3 points perspective painting from imagination. I'm going to start from this reference photo, and then I'm just gonna add my elements and make it my own. I was thinking about this imaginary building with maybe some Oriental vibe. I don't know, let's see how it turns out.
I started by building the perspective grid. The important thing to remember when drawing buildings in 3 points perspective is to put the vertical vanishing point far enough from the 2 vanishing points on the side. Otherwise, the angles of the vertical lines will just be too steep and seem not realistic at all. I decided to draw a 3-story building with a Japanese-style rooftop. And then I added some details like the chimney and some Chinese lanterns and some barrels. An interesting fact about China in perspective. In China, linear perspective wasn't actually known until almost 2 centuries after Brunelleschi invented it. China discovered linear perspective only when Dutch traders began trading in Western artworks in the 17th century. But this doesn't mean that perspective wasn't used already in Chinese art. Chinese artists were using mainly another form of perspective, which is called atmospheric perspective, where distant objects almost fade into the distance, while objects that are closer to the observer stand out in brighter hues and sharper details. I'm adding a bunch of details to make the house seem old and abandoned, like broken windows and these branches on a broken canopy. Maybe the colors of the wall are a little bit too bright for an old abandoned house, but I don't care, it's a fantasy house after all. I'm actually enjoying this process way more than just copying a photograph. It's fun and liberating to be able to add any kind of detail that I want and make it look exactly like I imagined it. Some final touches and I'm done. I'm adding some plants on the rooftop terrace, surprisingly alive ones, although the house is abandoned. And now the tedious process of drawing every single tile. I don't know why I decided to do that. And it's done.
Finally done. I mean, I'm super glad I did this. I had a lot of fun, but I'm also really glad it's over. I only see perspective lines everywhere I look now.
And here are the final results with 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, and 3 points perspective. Personally, I like the last one the most, probably because I had the most fun doing it.
But let me know in the comments below which one is your favorite. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and make sure to leave me a like and subscribe if you did. I leave the link here to my previous video in case you're interested, and till the next time, bye bye.